Hey everyone, and welcome. Have you ever looked at a performance report where the numbers just didn't feel right? Where the spreadsheet tells one story, but the reality on the ground was completely different? Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful technique that uncovers the real story behind the numbers. We'll see how to split variances to separate a flawed plan from what's actually happening in day-to-day operations. So here's our game plan for today. First up, we're going to look at a company whose budget became pretty much useless overnight. Then we'll see how the old-school traditional analysis gets the story totally wrong. After that, we'll introduce a smarter and, frankly, a much fairer method. We'll crunch the new numbers, see the hidden truth they reveal, and then we'll wrap it all up with a quick recap of the key formulas you absolutely need to know. All right, let's jump right in with a classic case study, HDR Ltd. So picture this. They've got their budget all set for the year, everything's planned out, and then bam, a new technology drops and it completely changes their labor efficiency. And right there, you've got a massive problem, right? I mean, if your original budget is now obsolete, how can you possibly judge your team's performance fairly? You just can't hold them to a standard that's completely outdated. It's not just unfair, it's just plain bad management. Okay, so this table lays out the whole situation for us. On the left, you've got the original standard. Think of this as the ex-ante budget, the one they made before the year kicked off. In the middle is the revised standard, the ex-post view. This is what the budget should have been once they accounted for that new, more efficient technology. And on the right, you've got the actual results, what really went down. And here's the absolute game changer. Look at the hours. The expectation dropped from 1,100 all the way down to 880. That's huge. Okay, so before we get to the smart way of doing this, let's start with the traditional approach. This is what most companies would do, just comparing the original plan to what actually happened. You're about to see why this is so flawed. So first up is the labor efficiency variance. Really, all this formula is asking is, did our team work more or fewer hours than we originally planned for? It's a straight comparison between the standard time and the actual time. So how does that work out? Well, we take the standard time they budgeted, that's 1,100 hours, right? 1 hour for each of the 1,100 units. Then we stack that up against the 1,200 hours they actually worked. That's a difference of negative 100 hours. Multiply that by the standard rate of 10 rupees per hour. And boom, that gives us a 1,000 rupee adverse variance. Now, adverse just means it's bad news. We used more hours and spent more than planned. Seems pretty cut and dry, right? Well, just wait. All right, let's look at the other piece of the puzzle, the rate variance. This one's all about what we paid for that labor. Did we pay more or less per hour than we thought we would? The formula just compares the standard rate to the actual rate. Okay, so we plug in the numbers, we take the standard rate of 10 rupees and subtract the actual rate they paid, which was a pretty good deal at 850. We take that difference, which is 1.5 rupees, and multiply it by the 1,200 hours they actually worked. And what do we get? An 1,800 rupee favorable variance. Favorable because, hey, the company got their labor cheaper than they budgeted for. That looks pretty good on paper. Okay, so let's put it all together. You've got 1,000 rupee adverse on efficiency, but that's more than canceled out by an 1,800 favorable on the rate. The grand total, an 800 rupee favorable variance. So you'd think, hey, high fives all around. Management is crushing it. But is that really what happened? And this is the most important question we can ask. That simple, traditional analysis points to a win, but it's hiding something huge. It totally ignores the fact that the original plan was broken. It was wrong from the second that new technology came in. So who are we really holding accountable here? And that, my friends, is why we need a smarter approach. We're going to split that single traditional variance into two powerful pieces. One that tells us what was wrong with the plan, and another that tells us how the team actually performed on the ground. This diagram right here is the whole concept in a nutshell. You see, we're taking that one big blurry number and splitting it in two. The planning variance pulls out all the errors in the original budget, things that were totally outside the production manager's control. The operational variance, on the other hand, measures how well that manager actually did against a realistic, updated standard. This is how we get to the truth. This is how you create a fair and accurate picture of performance. All right, you ready to crunch some new numbers? Let's do this. We're going to start with the operational variance, because this one tells us what was really happening on the factory floor. So, here's the formula for the operational efficiency variance, and here is the absolute key. See that? We are not using the old broken standard anymore. No way. We're comparing the actual time to the revised standard time, those 880 hours. That is the new fair and achievable target. So let's walk through the math. We take that new, realistic standard of 880 hours, you compare that to the 1,200 hours they actually used. Whoa, that's a difference of negative 320 hours. That's a lot. We then multiply that by the revised rate of 10 rupees.
And the final number? A staggering 3,200 rupee adverse variance. Now, that tells a completely different story, doesn't it? Once you compare them to a fair benchmark, you see that the operational performance wasn't so great after all.
Okay, so you're probably asking, wait a minute, where did that favorable variance from the first calculation go? Well, it's hiding in the planning variance. This formula's only job is to measure how bad the original budget was. It compares the old, easy standard to the new, realistic one. So here's what we do. We take the original 1,100 standard hours and put it up against the revised 880 hours. That difference of 220 hours, that's pure budget error. That's how much extra time the original plan had baked into it. We just multiply that by the original standard rate. And what does that give us? A 2,200 rupee favorable variance. But let's be crystal clear. This is not a reward for good performance. This is a favorable number only because the initial plan was way too conservative. It was a planning mistake, not an operational victory. Okay, so let's pull back and look at the big picture. Why did we go through all that? Why does this even matter? Well, because it completely changes the story. You know, this quote from the source material absolutely nails it. It says that by splitting them up, we find a large problem inefficiency that would have been completely invisible otherwise. The traditional method didn't just miss the problem, it actively hid it inside a misleading favorable number. So what are the big takeaways? What are the strategic implications here? Well, for one, you get a much fairer way to evaluate your managers. You're judging them on what they can actually control. It also puts a big spotlight on any problems in your planning process itself. And maybe most importantly, it makes sure everyone is focused on fixing the real problems, using a benchmark that actually means something. Okay, before we finish up, let's do a quick formula flash recap. This is your SCMPE toolkit for this topic. Let's lock these in.
First up, the old school one, traditional efficiency. It just compares the original standard time to the actual time. Simple, but as we saw, often misleading.
Then you've got the traditional rate variance. Again, all about comparing the standard rate to the actual rate you paid based on that initial plan. Now for the powerful ones, operational efficiency. Remember, this is the one that uses the revised standard. This is your true measure of how well the team performed with what they had. And to round it out, the planning efficiency variance. This is the one that quarantines the budget error. It just compares the old plan to the new, more realistic one.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into planning and operational variances. So I'll leave you with one final question to think about. Now that you know how to separate a bad plan from actual performance, how will that change the way you look at a set of results from now on? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.